Well, very good evening. Can you all hear? Good. We have a lot to do in a short time. And tonight's empowerment and talk is about compassion, which is at the very heart of Tibetan Buddhism. In the actual practice and development of compassion, we try to make it something which is present not just when we meditate, but in everything we do in our lives, and especially in Dharma talks, which is why we start by turning our loving care to all beings, and we think that we're here for these hour or two this evening for all of them. In a very practical way, we think that by learning, by listening, by reflecting, by learning to be more open, caring people, then in the future, actually, we will have more to give to others. And in particular, we'll have more clarity of mind, more strength of conviction, of the dignity of our purpose in life, and more loving care. So I'd like you to try and stretch your minds out to think of all of the humans with whom we share this world, the animals, any type of conscious life you can imagine, and to try and dedicate our time together to all of their welfare. And while you're doing that, I shall groan away in Tibetan, and you probably won't understand a word, but you can be thinking of those things. Sanje chedam saje chanam la jancho badu dhamne chapsanje dagi jinso jipe sanam je drola penchera sanje drapara sho daso semjen tamche lo choso drovara jinje laptu sol cholamdu drovara jinje laptu sol lam tropa salvara jinje laptu sol Propaya Sheso Chawara Jinje Lapto Sol Haldan Sawe Lama Rinpoche Dagi Chawara Pende Denshola Kadrin Chambo Gone Jezonte Koson Toje Madrop Saldu Sol. Tonight's talk is in three parts. Three very short parts. The first is about compassion. The first is about the nature of what's going to happen later on when Rinpoche comes, and empowerment, this empowerment. And then thirdly and mainly, I'll take you through the empowerment we'll receive this evening so that you'll understand some of the different things that are happening, and in particular, you'll know what to do when the time comes, which is very important. But first about compassion. Now, it's quite embarrassing to talk to people about compassion because I'm sure many of you are much more compassionate than I am. So who am I to tell you about compassion? We live in general in quite a compassionate society, and there have been some amazing changes in our world in the last 20 years where we've developed an awareness, much more awareness of the rest of the planet, of the people within our own society, and I think in general we are moving in a more caring direction. It's not as though I'm telling you about something you don't know about. For instance, when you come to Buddhism and you come to meditation, very often that's something totally new. It's a total discovery. But compassion is something we all have. No one is without compassion, but who here can say they have enough compassion? So we need more, don't we? A lot more. There's no limit to the amount of compassion we need. And in particular, if one wants to liberate one's mind and one's life, if one wants that clarity and beauty and nobility of being that the Buddha attained, then compassion is really everything. In fact, the Buddha himself said, if one could take all of my teachings, and my gosh, there are so many of them. 45 years, 100 books of teaching. Said if you could take all of those, put them into one thing, as though you could look at it in the palm of your hand and say, that's what it's all about, then it would be compassion. All of our Buddhist training is for the opening up, the strengthening, development of our compassion. If we had time, I'd like to go around the room and ask you what compassion means for you. Sometimes we do this in teachings, a very quick fire first thought. What's compassion? Bum, 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 bum. And I think we won't do that, but if we did it, I think you find for most people, compassion's a sort of a feeling. When you feel compassion, it's a nice feeling. It's a feeling of sympathy and care. And it's mainly something you feel when you become aware of suffering. In Buddhism, we define compassion in terms of suffering. It's the mind's response to suffering, and we define it as a longing to be able to alleviate suffering, but not only that, to alleviate the causes of suffering, of future suffering. And what I'd like to present to you tonight is what you might not have thought about compassion, and what is very, very strongly developed in the Buddhist teaching on compassion. And when we look at suffering, we split it into 3 areas. And this means our compassion is 3 levels of response to those 3 areas. Now, the first one is very obvious. It's when somebody is hurting, crying, physically they're in trouble, or mentally they're distressed, then this triggers in most good human beings a sort of a response where you want to help. That's really the first level of suffering. It's called of compassion, the response. It's triggered by the vision of suffering. I think that's what most people's idea of compassion is. Even the word compassio, to feel with the other. But there's a second level of suffering where actually what you see doesn't look bad at all. It has more of a, these smiley things, it has more of a than a Sometimes. It's when it doesn't look as though there's something wrong. But the whole situation, because of the very nature of existence, is brewing up trouble for the future. That's one aspect of it. In general, if we look more carefully, then it's the compassionate response that's there because we understand cause and effect. Now, this is a very Buddhist notion. It's based on reincarnation. The very way life works is that what we are now is because of what we did in the past, and what we're doing now is going to create what we are in the future. Now, from this point of view, let's take a very simple example. If one reads about a terrible dictator who's oppressing people in a country, and we see buildings being bulldozed, people being tortured, we feel compassion for the victims. But a Buddhist would feel equal compassion for the dictator. Now, that dictator might be having a whale of a time, be gathering in the riches from what he or she does, however it works.